The commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Division sat motionless in the turret of his Panther AOSF. Watching through his periscope as another American M4A3 Sherman brewed up on the ridgeline ahead. Black smoke poured from its engine deck. His 75mm KWK-42 L-70 gun had punched through the Sherman's frontal armor at 200 meters, a shot that would have barely scratched his own glacis plate. It was November 1944 in the Lorraine region of France, and by every technical specification, his Panther was the superior tank. Yet within 3 weeks, he and his crew would voluntarily abandon it for a captured American Sherman. The reason why reveals one of World War II's most counterintuitive truths. The best tank on paper was often the worst tank in practice. The Panther AOSF. A and G models represented the pinnacle of German tank design philosophy. Introduced after the shock of encountering Soviet T-34s at Kursk in July 1943, the Panther packed a high-velocity 75mm gun that could penetrate 124 meters of armor at 1,000 meters, nearly double the penetration of the Sherman's 75mm M3 gun. Its sloped frontal armor measured 80 millimeters thick at 55 degrees, providing effective protection equivalent to 140 millimeters of vertical plate. The specifications were impressive on every dimension. The Panther could achieve 46 km/h on roads, and its Zeiss TZF-12A telescopic sight gave German crews crystal-clear target acquisition at ranges where American tankers were still squinting through their M4A1 periscopes. The interleaved road wheel suspension system, a Schachtelaufwerk design, provided exceptional cross-country performance and a stable firing platform. German tankers called it the Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapon. American intelligence reports from late 1943 recommended avoiding frontal engagements with Panthers entirely. The official tactical doctrine for Sherman crews facing Panthers was simple and terrifying: flank them, swarm them, or call in air support. Never engage frontally. The kill-loss ratio in direct Panther-Sherman engagements favored the Germans at roughly 5-1 in open terrain. Lieutenant Colonel Albin Erzik of the 8th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, recorded in his combat diary, "The Panther is the best tank on any battlefield. We fear it more than anything else the Germans have. We need 5 Shermans to reliably kill 1 Panther, and we lose 3 in the process." The impossible discovery, but by the winter of 1944, something extraordinary was happening. German units operating captured M4 Shermans, particularly the 2nd and 9th SS Panzer Divisions, began filing unusual after-action reports. Crews who had previously commanded Panthers were requesting to remain in their captured American tanks. Some units even painted Balkenkreuz, German crosses, on Shermans and used them preferentially over available Panthers sitting in repair depots. When Panzer Meyer's 12th SS Panzer Division captured a dozen relatively intact Shermans near Mortagne in August 1944 during the failed German counteroffensive, something unprecedented occurred. Veteran Panther crews volunteered to crew them. Obersturmführer Rudolf von Ribbentrop, son of the German foreign minister, personally requested to command a captured Sherman rather than wait for his Panther to return from repair. American intelligence was baffled. Interrogation reports from captured German tankers in late 1944 revealed a consistent, shocking pattern. SS Hauptscharführer Franz Staudegger, who had famously knocked out 22 Soviet tanks at Kursk while commanding a Tiger IV, told his American interrogators, "Give me a Sherman with a full tank of fuel over a Panther with half a tank any day. At least I know the Sherman will get me to the battle." The revelation came down to a single, unglamorous factor that military historians had largely overlooked in their focus on armor thickness and gun penetration. Mechanical reliability. The Panther's Maybach HL230P30 engine, a 700 horsepower V12 monster, required complete overhauls every 1,000 kilometers under ideal conditions. In the mud, cold, and stress of actual combat operations, that figure often dropped to 600 to 800 kilometers. In comparison, the Sherman's Continental R975 radial engine routinely operated for 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers between major maintenance. The Ford GAA V8 variant introduced in the M4A3 model could go even longer. Some units reported 5,000-plus kilometer intervals between engine overhauls. The Panther's final drive system represented a catastrophic engineering compromise. The same transmission components originally designed for the 25-ton Panzer III were being stressed by a 45-ton vehicle. German engineers knew this was problematic during the design phase, but Hitler's demand for immediate deployment after Kursk meant there was no time to redesign the system. Final drives failed on average every 150 kilometers. During the late war period, a fact that rendered the Panther's superior armor and gun nearly irrelevant. Obergefreiter Hans Becker of the 2nd Panzer Division recorded in his diary on January 15, 1945, and we have 16 Panthers on the company roster. Today 3 run. Yesterday 5 ran. Last week 8 ran. We cannot attack because we cannot move. The Americans advance and we sit here like concrete pillboxes, waiting for parts that will never arrive. Miller's crew has been working on their final drive for 6 days now. The Americans will be in Berlin before he gets it fixed. The Sherman's technical specifications told a different story than its battlefield reputation suggested. Yes, its 75mm M3 gun was inferior, penetrating only 68mm at 1,000 meters compared to the Panther's 124mm. Yes, its armor was thinner, 51mm frontal armor versus the Panther's effective 140mm, but these numbers obscured what actually mattered in sustained combat operations. The 4A3 with HVSS, horizontal volute spring suspension, could travel 160 kilometers on roads between breakdowns, more than 10 times the practical reliability of late war Panthers. The Sherman's track design, while simpler, rarely failed catastrophically. Its Detroit diesel 6246 variant or Ford GAA V8 engines were mechanically simple, reliable, and could be serviced by crews with basic mechanical training and standard tools. When a Sherman threw a track, a common occurrence in the hedgerow bocage country of Normandy, 2 crew members could repair it in 30 minutes using only the tools carried on the vehicle. When a Panther threw a track, it required an SDKFZ-9 FAMO half-track recovery vehicle, specialized tools, and often 4 hours of work by trained mechanics. In the fluid, mobile warfare of 1944-45 France, this difference was operationally decisive. The Sherman's ammunition storage, despite its Ronson lighter reputation, was actually superior in late-war wet stowage variants. The M4A3 76W model with wet ammunition racks reduced fire incidents from penetrating hits by 80% compared to early Sherman models. The Panther, conversely, had ammunition stored in the hull sides and turret basket, locations that were frequently ignited by penetrating hits. Staff Sergeant Lafayette, Poole of the 3rd Armored Division, who destroyed 258 German vehicles during his combat career, preferred the M4A3 specifically because I can fix it myself if something breaks. And it doesn't break often. I'd rather have a tank that works than a tank that's theoretically better but sits broken half the time. The 2nd SS Panzer Division's experience during the Ardennes offensive illustrated the paradox perfectly. On paper, they fielded 38 Panthers and 27 Panzer IVs for Operation Wacht am Rhein, watch on the Rhine, in December 1944. They were assigned to Kampfgruppe Hansen, which was supposed to drive through to the Meuse River bridges and cut off American forces in the northern shoulder of the Bulge. Within 3 days of the offensive's start on December 16th, mechanical failures had reduced their effective strength to 19 operational tanks, and this was before they had engaged in significant combat. The primary culprits were frozen fuel lines. The Panther's fuel system was notoriously vulnerable to cold. Seized final drives, transmission failures, and engine fires caused by overheating in low-gear operation through the Ardennes forests. Many crews abandoned Panthers with transmission failures and commandeered anything that would move, including captured Shermans from the encircled American units at St. Vith. Hauptsturmführer Keston's company operated 4 captured M4A1 Shermans through the entire Bulge offensive, while their assigned Panthers sat immobilized in Losheim with frozen fuel lines and seized final drives. The irony was crushing. The Panthers that did reach American positions often performed exactly as expected, destroying multiple Shermans in frontal engagements. But for every Panther that made it to combat, 3 more sat broken in the rear areas. The Americans, meanwhile, maintained their operational tempo because their Sherman simply kept running. Major Hal McCown, captured temporarily by Kampfgruppe Piper during the Bulge, observed German tank recovery operations firsthand. He later reported, "They had all these magnificent Panthers lined up in Stumont, but half of them weren't running. Their mechanics were working around the clock. Meanwhile, we'd have a Sherman get hit, and if the crew survived, they'd have another Sherman within hours. The Germans had better tanks. We had more tanks that actually worked." This wasn't isolated to the Western Front. Captured equipment reports from the Soviet Eastern Front revealed similar patterns. When the Red Army captured several Panthers near Brody in July 1944, they conducted extensive testing at the Kubinka Proving Grounds outside Moscow. The Soviet evaluation report, declassified in the 1990s, was brutally frank. The Panther is an excellent tank for the first 100 kilometers. After this, it becomes a maintenance liability. The T-34-85's armor and gun are inferior, but the T-34-85 will reach the battlefield. The Panther will reach the repair depot. Soviet tankers testing captured Panthers reported that the interleaved road wheel system, which provided such excellent ride characteristics, became a nightmare in muddy conditions. Mud would pack between the wheels, freeze overnight, and completely immobilize the vehicle by morning. The T-34's simpler wide-track design could break through frozen mud. The Panther couldn't. Guards Lieutenant Colonel Dmitry Lavrenenko, one of the Soviet Union's top tank aces, was quoted in a Red Army internal publication. "Give me 20 T-34s over 10 Panthers. The Panthers will kill more of my tanks in individual combat, but my 20 T-34s will all arrive at the battle. 5 of the Panthers will be broken before they arrive. This means I fight 5 Panthers with 20 T-34s, not 10 Panthers with 20 T-34s. Mathematics wins wars." The American tankers who eventually learned about German preferences for Shermans experienced profound cognitive dissonance. They had spent months believing they were in inferior vehicles, using tactics built around the Sherman's weaknesses, and accepting higher casualty rates as the price of their tank's inferiority. Sergeant Eugene Simmers, a Sherman commander in the 3rd Armored Division, recorded his reaction to learning about German-captured Sherman use. "We called our Shermans Ronsons. They light first time, every time. We were terrified of Panthers. We'd see that long gun and that sloped armor and our hearts would sink. Then we capture this SS Obersturmbannführer near Paderborn in March 45, and he tells us through an interpreter that he'd been commanding a captured Sherman. for 2 months because his Panther division had 3 working tanks out of 31 on the roster. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. We'd lost good men because we thought we were outclassed. And we were outclassed, technically. But we weren't outfought because our tanks actually worked. I'm still not sure how to feel about that. It doesn't bring back Kowalski or Martinez, but it means their deaths weren't because we had bad equipment. They were just in a bad spot at a bad time. And that happens in war regardless of what tank you're in. The impact of this reliability crisis fundamentally shaped late-war German armored doctrine in ways that Allied intelligence only partially understood at the time. By January 1945, German tactical planning had to account for 30–50% of their armor being non-operational on any given day due to mechanical issues, not combat damage. This created a vicious cycle. German units couldn't conduct mobile defensive operations because they couldn't rely on their armor being operational. This forced them into static defensive positions. Static positions were vulnerable to Allied air power and artillery. When positions were overrun, the immobile Panthers had to be abandoned, often destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. This further reduced German armored strength. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, wrote in a February 1945 report to Hitler, "We produce excellent tanks that our crews cannot maintain in field conditions. The enemy produces adequate tanks that require minimal maintenance. In a war of attrition, adequate tanks that work defeat excellent tanks that don't. We are losing this war in our repair depots, not on the battlefield." Hitler, characteristically, blamed the soldiers rather than the equipment. But frontline commanders understood the reality. By March 1945, some panzer divisions were requesting older, simpler Panzer IV tanks instead of Panthers specifically, because the Panzer IVs were more reliable. Meanwhile, American armored divisions maintained 85–90% operational readiness throughout the 1944–45 campaign. This wasn't because American tankers were better mechanics or because American tanks were necessarily better designed. It was because the Americans had built an entire system around keeping tanks operational. Every American armored division had organic maintenance companies with mobile repair facilities. Spare parts were standardized and abundant. Tank crews received extensive mechanical training. Damaged tanks were recovered quickly by M32 tank recovery vehicles. Engines could be swapped in field conditions in under 4 hours. The Germans had superior engineering but inadequate logistics. The Americans had adequate engineering but superior logistics. In total war, logistics proved more decisive than engineering excellence. Colonel John Heinz, commander of the 2nd Armored Division's Maintenance Battalion, explained the philosophy. "We don't try to build the perfect tank. We try to build a tank that's good enough and can be kept running. The Sherman isn't perfect, but I can keep Shermans running with mechanics trained in 6 weeks using parts I can get from 3 different supply depots. The Germans built a masterpiece, but masterpieces are fragile." The final irony appeared in the war's last weeks. In April 1945, as American and Soviet forces closed on Berlin, several German units abandoned their remaining Panthers entirely, not because they were destroyed, but because they had no fuel. The Maybach HL-230 P-30 engine consumed fuel at an extraordinary rate, 280 liters per 100 kilometers on roads, much higher in combat conditions. The Sherman's R975 consumed 225 liters per 100 kilometers, still high, but significantly less. In the fuel-starved final months of the war, this difference meant that even when Panthers were mechanically operational, they couldn't operate. German tank crews walked away from fully functional Panthers that had empty fuel tanks, while American Shermans continued advancing on captured German fuel supplies. The Panther represents perhaps the ultimate lesson in military technology. Specifications without sustainability are worthless. The best tank isn't the one with the thickest armor or the most powerful gun. It's the one that's actually running when the battle begins, that can reach the battlefield, that can be repaired when damaged, that can be fueled, and that can sustain operations over weeks and months rather than days. German engineering excellence had created a magnificent weapon that couldn't reach the battlefield consistently. American industrial pragmatism had created a mediocre weapon that was always there, always running, always in the fight. In total war, the latter proved infinitely more valuable. Post-war military analysis vindicated the American approach. The U.S. Army's official history of armored operations in Europe concluded, the Sherman was not the best tank of World War II by technical specifications, but it was the best tank for winning World War II, because winning required tanks that worked more than it required tanks with superior armor or guns. Soviet post-war tank development followed the American model rather than the German one. The T-54-55 series, the most produced tank in history, prioritized reliability, maintainability, and operational simplicity over technical sophistication. The design philosophy was simple. Build a tank that works in the field with minimal support. The lessons were sometimes forgotten. The U.S. Army's M551 Sheridan in Vietnam and the early M2-M3 Bradley variants suffered from overcomplexity and reliability issues reminiscent of the Panther. But each time the lesson was relearned. In sustained combat, the weapon that works beats the weapon that's theoretically superior. The Germans who survived the war and later wrote about their experiences understood this better than anyone. Otto, a legendary Tiger tank commander with 150-plus tank kills, wrote in his memoir, "We had the best tanks. But best doesn't win wars. Enough wins wars. The Americans had enough. We had best. Best lost. The Panther was a masterpiece of engineering. The Sherman was a masterpiece of pragmatism. History records which approach won the war.